Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 393rd New Social Environment. I am Nick Bennett, the Special Projects Editor here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Elliott Hundley and Andrew Woolbright. We're thrilled to have the poet Catherine Fatima here, who will read to close today's program. A few quick notes before we get started. The Rail team will be helping out with tech if you have any questions. Closed captions are available by pressing the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. And we've started all of our events with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. The heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all who struggle for freedom, and recognition that when it comes to liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation, as said by the great Angela Davis. In that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat for a living document of resources and actions that we'll be posting in just a second. But for now, let's introduce today's guest and host. Los Angeles-based artist Elliott Hundley is known for expanding the traditional notions of collage and assemblage in a multidisciplinary practice of painting, drawing, sculpture, and photography that synthesizes ancient epics, futuristic narratives, and contemporary realities. Hundley leverages an abiding knowledge of classical mythology and literature to weave a fabric of allusions. His current exhibition at Casman Gallery is in New York, and it is on view through October 23rd, 2021. Our host today is artist, curator, and critic Andrew Woolbright, based in Brooklyn, New York, and an MFA graduate from RISD in painting. He currently teaches at SUNY New Paltz and is the founder and director of the gallery Below Grand, located on the Lower East Side in New York. In addition to curating, he writes for Momus, Eflux, Art and Education, Two Coats of Paint, White Hot Magazine, and Here at the Rail. Without further ado, Andrew, passing the mic over to you.
Hi, everyone. Great seeing you all today. And thank you, Elliott, for joining us at the Brooklyn Rail. I'm so excited to get into this show, which is a breathtaking show. And I encourage everyone to run, don't walk, go see this as soon as you can. This show is based on Jean Genet's play, The Balcony, as Nick mentioned. And going with this show is a 40-foot long mural that will be unveiled with Prospect in New Orleans, the triennial there. So it's really a feat putting all this together. All of this work was done in the last year. And to fill in some blanks, Elliott, his past work has often dealt with mythology and kind of these larger grand narratives as sites of cultural emotion, and using actors to really navigate like cultural ideologies. And this body of work has jumped into theater, like modernist theater particularly. And Elliott, I wanted to start off by asking you how you came across Jean Genet's Balcony to begin with, and why the shift from Greek mythology to modern play, which is such a wonderful move. Elliott, I think you're muted still. Yeah.
Hi, thank you.
Of course.
So I worked with Euripides plays for about 10 years. And I knew that I wanted to do something. There was a transition. I also did some work with Rilke with Sonnets to Orpheus, but I wanted to do something modern, and I was also thinking about the content of Euripides and the sort of frenzied anxiety of Euripides. So I chose Artaud, and I worked with a play called There Is No More Firmament for 4 years. and I had always been circling around Jean Genet, like before I picked Artaud. And then when I was looking over the Genet material again, it occurred to me that the balcony could be a vignette within Artaud's There Is No More Firmament. And I've been thinking, in choosing material, instead of just feeling like I'm an illustrator moving from one piece to another, like what is the connective line between these choices, and trying to build a constellation of a larger narrative myself.
That's so fascinating. I think it's really interesting what you said about putting Genet's play as a small vignette within Artaud's play, because in so many ways your work is about these large fields of vision, but then these macro, micro kind of points of expansion that get to that as well. So seeing like moments of like, I'm reminded of like the way Kafka can take us into the window of like a building that had nothing to do with the play, but like you're able to like expand small moments into larger scenes. And while we're talking about that, David Pagel and you had a wonderful conversation last year. And in it, the two of you talked about this concept of the digital sublime, which I've been thinking a lot about since you brought it up. And specifically, this overwhelming material of images that we're all now having to deal with on a daily basis. Could you speak more about that digital sublime and why you're getting into this frenzy, anxiety?
Well, for me, it's even before the digital landscape emerged, it was something that I sensed and felt about reality, and felt the need to express, sort of like converging, conflicting, simultaneous, layered, subjective, multi-subjective reality was often difficult to manage for me in general. So I feel like it's more that it was something that I've always reckoned with, and now the internet and our visual landscape has just exploded and made it so much more self-evident.
I think it's interesting, going off of what you said, that you were looking for moments of anxiety within Euripides too. Like going back to ancient ideas of like feeling displaced and overwhelmed with kind of like cultural associations.
Well, Euripides chose to, he shifted his subjects to, for example, focus on women, or focus on communities that were not Athens. I think that it's related to that. The instead of like undermining the primacy of like Athenian sensibility.
Well, I mean, at various times you've talked about this overload, this density, this digital sublime is thrilling but awful. But you've also talked about it as like the opportunity that you just mentioned before is like multiple viewpoints, a multiplicity of viewpoints all being shared, that it isn't just a singular narrative. But like you said, going into other narratives that share the same space. And Nick, could we move on to, there's a lovely shot. Yes, perfect. So it isn't just a negative. It is like this density operates as in like multiple non-hegemonic viewpoints kind of operating around as well.
Oh, well, that's the whole point, that I see the the hegemonic is the singular. The digital sublime is our window into the complexity that is real. So this is not a critique of that anxiety. It's a welcome acknowledgement. If you're not anxious, you're not living.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Going off of that, I think that aspect of a positive, like a positive nature of being, of multivalent viewpoints, and that anxiety that comes from all these experiences happening at the same time, wrapping around truth from every angle. It does ultimately get towards, at moments, incomprehension, right? Like another aspect of your work, which is wonderful, is the enjoyment of the experience when you're with them, but there's really an inability to remember these things. You have to keep returning to them because they are existing past the ability to remember them because of the amount of information you've put within them.
That's by design. So even I can't remember them. There was something that you made me think though, and that was that reality is incomprehensible. And I don't mean that in a nihilistic way, because I do believe that it is, we can understand as much as we are able to reach and grasp, knowing that it is infinitely incomprehensible. And that we can resolve, not resign, reconcile ourselves to that reality with an openness.
Yeah. I mean, it's that word, that epoche, that expansive.
What does that mean?
It's non-judgment. It's like extending the space of not making a critical assumption about anything that you're able to do in this like wonderful field of vision.
Yeah. But then combining that with discernment, like, because there is an interpretive, the whole endeavor is interpretive in the case of artwork, my artwork.
But interpretive, in which case? Interpretive to you, interpretive to the audience?
Well, to the audience and me, because I'm using this way of working as a way of thinking and a way of processing. I don't think very well with language. I don't write. I'm not good at articulating the complexity of my ideas with language. So I do it with materials and images. And but so there's that, but there's also, sorry, I'm on my iPhone and calls. There's also I'm trying to create a landscape where someone feels relaxed. Actually, it's just like as you described, it's stretching out that moment of perception before judgment. But there's no judgment, but there is just deciphering it. It's not only natural to construct meaning within these juxtaposition of image.
Exactly. I remember being struck by this moment in Rebel, where it looks like the encaustic kind of wax has come dripping down, or is really engaging like a gesture with this field of images. And it really, for me, was a wonderful visual metaphor of the way you're thinking about time it is this like gelatinous kind of time of suspension, of like free floating in this space rather than directing or pushing us in or out of it.
Well, it's all of this work is rooted in gestural abstraction, and the details of it are simply a means to prolong or make more extreme that spectrum of time within the gesture that is expressed. So some things very slow and some things very immediate.
I want to go back to the word discernment that you used, because this detail is wonderful that also shows your use of pins, creating that gestural abstraction in that space, which when you see these up close, the pins are so specific, like the tops of them are being used to create shape and to create cluster and swarm in such a convincing way. And I think that that invites that open interpretation in a really effective way. And I found myself in the gallery thinking about the difference between signal versus noise, which in communication theory and data theory, it's an important question. When does something have meaning? And when is it just the fuzz or the white noise of like the radio signal? And I'm wondering how you're thinking about these moments within the work, that some seem incredibly specific that we're meant to really linger with, and some are kind of almost like the camouflage of that, like the static.
Mm-hmm. But they blend, it's a spectrum. There is not a distinction between signal and noise. There is a signal is emergent. And so in that way, it's a game I'm playing with people and the signal is the reward, and the search. I mean, all of this is a metaphor for the way for discernment, and for just the way we navigate our lives and the beauty of our lives. But I'm trying to like create a simulacrum for that search for meaning and beauty. Meaning, the beauty is the do you say prophylactic? Not prophylactic, the lubrication.
Could you repeat that, Elliott? Beauty is the lubrication for the discernment?
Yeah, I just mean that it's like the catalyst, or it's not the catalyst. It just facilitates. Beauty is the motion. It's the allure. It's the invitation. Creates the movement for you to move between signifiers. The pleasure of the walk through the garden.
It reminds me of like the poppy field in some ways, in like Wizard of Oz.
You mean
like
in the Wizard? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, like it is this kind of seductive thing that allows this gelatinous. I guess I'd ask, does amnesia play a role within this work in some ways? Like, or are you thinking about us like losing our sense of space or our sense of time?
No, because I basically feel mine is coming at this from like, I have intense anxiety about not being able to remember every second of my life. So I feel like not amnesia, but that we're living in a sense of to me, there's always a sense of loss when it relates to memory. Memory is just the subjective nuggets that we can hold on to, but we can't actually remember everything. And then when we do, we filter it through subjectivity. So, and it changes. We misremember, we change our memories to create narratives for ourselves, to create a story about our identity. So even that, you can't even trust, memory can't be trusted. I don't think. I mean, obviously, if we rely on it, it's necessary, but it's important to remember that it's not as solid as we would like to think.
Yeah, and then the anxiety is the anxiety, like you said, of not being able to be present as much as you want to be, or like not maintaining the present moment, not having the memory, which is really interesting. In this piece, the general, I mean, it isn't just an expanded field. There are so many moments when I looked at this piece where there does seem to be like the color palette, this almost like pale horse rider is kind of like displayed within it. This like gray neutralized beiginess to it is like creates this like really wonderful mood. Would you like to move to the next slide, Nick? We can. And then bishop color is very specific. It has that that cochineal red that is like associated with cardinals' robes and militarized, like the British soldiers wore this red as well. It was such an authoritative use of that color. And you're creating this like ring or this boundary line around the entire thing.
The opening scene is of the bishop, and it describes the red walls of the fake sacristy within the brothel.
I also think it's wonderful in this move. I read it almost, I mean, the triangulated shape kind of flowing up through the piece. It's perforating this like red hegemonic boundary. There's almost kind of like a militarized like pincher move or like kind of breaking it up. But then there's also this like reaffirmation of like maybe the spiritual with this like triangle shape as well. But your sense of structure and color is really interesting. Obviously, it isn't just a field. Like you're also returning it, like you said, to gestural abstraction that seems to hide your meanings within it.
I mean, my compositional attitude or strategy is also about emergent. So it's not about my authority or my control. It's about the natural, slow accumulation of parts.
Yeah, precisely. This wonderful detail shot. Move on to the next one. Going into that. Now the queen, along the edge of this, there are a lot of images of TV screens, books, kind of like the mediums and messages of getting the messages of power out, like the way that's being processed or handled, or that's what it made me think of anyways.
I mean, I guess because the queen is only an image. Like there is no purpose except for the image, the figural embodiment of an idea via an image. It's like the ultimate figure. I don't know another way to say it. So yeah, so it's like the means of the dispersal of that image is the thing. That's it. Like that's not the person, it's the projection of the image of.
Yeah. And I love that all the color is concentrated at the edges again. It's like all of the movement, all of the kaleidoscopic spectrum of culture is at the boundary. And the more we get towards the center, or like maybe where the queen resides, it just becomes this like hollowed out place, you know, or it's like white, where it really is about that the queen or maybe power is held hostage by the multiple viewpoints that assemble this image for her, like you're saying. Very good. Can we move on to the next one? And Thief includes a lot of mirrors, which is a relationship. Sorry, Elliott.
Well, you were going to say, go ahead.
No.
I was anticipating what you might. I think the mirror in Thief, I was thinking about the image and me as a thief, stealing the images of people. Because, you know, the queen is about the dispersal of that image. And for me, Thief is about me as an image maker. And me projecting images of people in the same way. And the mirror is I'm reflecting the you know, the image of the subject, the person, the actor, the person in my life. But in doing so, there's an intrinsic violence.
And Genet's play in many ways is about this as well, that the artist finds themselves complicit to the power structures that seem very random. It seems like the artist is also trying to like get a hold of their own role within the culture, and stepping into.
Can you repeat that? Say that again.
Well, it seems like within Genet that the bohemian or the artist is also, like you said, complicit in these roles of power that are abstract.
Yes. No one is outside of the game.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way out.
Yeah. I really like this moment in The Thief where you have this strong use of gesture with like the black kind of creating like a separation in the crowd or separation in the swarm. And you're directing our eye into yellow or into blue and kind of channeling our energy towards maybe what you'd call it beautiful. Can you talk about when gesture feels important, when line feels important?
You know, for me, it's so minimal. It's like I do just enough. So I don't want anyone to feel managed or manipulated, but I do have responsibilities or I do have a job, you know, so does that kind of answer your question? I try to have the slightest touch possible in terms of that kind of, because there are decisions, obviously, that infinite decisions. But I try to make them untraceable, or like, or also they defy my expectation as well. So I trick myself into thinking I didn't make them, that they made themselves.
Is there a drawing process involved? Because I mean, the structure is it, like you said, there are minimal moments, but intentional moments of direction. But are you creating a drawing that starts to kind of form these compositions, or is it
You mean, is there
instinctual?
any planning at all?
Yeah.
No, none. I do draw on them, and I do make drawings, and my drawings I tend to make in 1 or 2 days. I have some drawings right now that I'm taking like a month on, but the drawing, those pieces that I do that take less time are more to remind me of what spontaneity looks like. So they're more performative, like dress runs for the tone that I want in the larger work.
Yeah. Can we move
But
on to the next slide?
there's no planning.
This is a picture of you working in your studio to get a sense of scale and the amount of touch going into placing these things. Which, Elliott, where does your pleasure come from in the work? Like, where is the moment of enjoyment? Is it in the process, or is it in the interpretations?
I mean, I think it's, if it's not pleasurable, I don't do it. I won't even, in terms of art making, there's plenty of things in my life and responsibilities that I have to do, but the art can be what you want it to be. And I've decided if I don't enjoy it, it doesn't happen. Also because I believe that time is the biggest value to making art. So it's a strategy to, if I enjoy it, every aspect of it, I can do it more and more and more. And I don't want to serve my art. I just want it to be like creative growth. I want it to be something generative. But that said, I also like the idea of work. I love keeping my hands busy, so that's a pleasure. Yeah.
How often are you working on these in a given day? What's your schedule like as far as duration?
I work a lot. I work a lot. I work during sort of business hours, and then take a break in the evening and socialize and rest and read or look at my phone or play with my dogs. And then I start again in the evening and go late. So, but I also do lots of work that isn't productive because I'm following the idea of pleasure. So I make lots of things that I don't ever show the world because they don't make any sense yet. Yeah.
Do things from the outside or the reality outside the world affect your process and practice, like the speed that you're adding the images to it, or the permanence, or the Do you find yourself, like, when you're personally anxious, like relying more on the work to help? Or where do things come from? Or is the work just continually the work that produces its own momentum?
Well, the work is a refuge. I will say that. But it's a refuge because it's a way to process external reality. So, so yeah, it's the outside world is the material every day for the work. But it is a closed, things come in and out of that space. Like, I do have a practice that is, I do create a sealed environment where things come in and out. Like there is a sense of boundary. I will say that. I don't, for example, I don't listen to NPR all day while I work. You know, I don't let a voice like that dominate my mind. I will engage with, like, that would be something that I would more want to do in the evening when I'm on my own. But I don't want to be subjected to, I do believe that constant subjection, being subjected to something like that, things, even positive things, can be insidious in their influence and keep us from criticality. So, yeah, so there is, I feel like that might answer your question.
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, I think of like the phrase that's kind of been invented in the last like 2 years or 3 years, doom scrolling, that we have this relationship to like being addicted to our scroll of news constantly being updated. I could imagine keeping that at the boundary while you're in the studio is very important.
Well, I think it's also, it's important to view the broader landscape, because the daily landscape, I mean, that's something else. Everyone thinks I'm so obsessed with details, but really the details are a distraction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're like the dazzle or the camouflage in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of Goethe's color theory, was that nothing in the center mattered, that if you lined up the intense colors at the borders of the canvas, that it would inform everything in the center. But in some ways, the interior, the details, like it is just this like spectacular dazzle, but the way they become larger shapes of color or movement is like really what informs everything on the inside.
Mm-hmm. Well, also then it's, I mean, I don't know that color theory, but when you say that, the word that comes to mind is, or the concept that comes to mind, or the image, is a space for projection.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is something else that I feel like I'm trying to do, which is giving, like, if the dazzling colors are on the side and the middle becomes a space for projection.
It's like a stage where there are actors, but the actors don't know their lines. Like the lines are being dictated by the audience in some ways.
Yeah, and I want my paintings to generate images in the minds of the viewer, not for them to just look at my painting. I want them, the whole reason is that I want them to think of their own lives and their own material, tactile experience and association while they meander through the information.
And that meandering really lets you do that in a wonderful way. Like the sense of meander leads me to, I want to hear more about visual time versus material time and how you're thinking of like the informational time in these works. Like, because there are moments that take us nostalgically back to like the modern period, but there are also moments of now that you're interjecting. I'm wondering how you're thinking about visual time versus material and how they relate to each other.
What is visual time and what is material time?
I'm thinking like you have a work called The Crawling Eye, where like the visual time for the audience is like us crawling across the surface in a very slow way. I imagine materially, because of the scale of so many images, it's a slow time as well, right? But at the same time, it's like we don't really have access to it. We're not tracking, we're really like landing on any image. We're like continuing with the crawl. Like the materials aren't collecting our attention. They're just passing us off to the next image. And then there's time itself, which, I mean, that gets complicated, but many timelines are crashed into or swarming at the same time if you start to really pay attention to the images. And so I guess I'm thinking about temporally, how do you think that the audience is supposed to feel? Are they in the now with you, or they feel stretched out?
Stretched out meaning into the past, present as well?
Yeah.
Stretched out. I mean, but that said, I make the images I make that can't be photographically reproduced because I want people to feel they're present in their body. And they also define memory because I want them to think, oh, well, I have to look at this now because I won't be able to remember it. I won't be able to look at it in a photograph. So I need to be here with my body. So in that way, it's very present. But then in that moment, I feel like, yeah, ideally, I would want someone to be present in the moment and then scanning the full spectrum of their lives in the future, the fantasy, as well as reality.
I love that.
So not just being in the present. I don't want it to be about, oh, I'm in the present about this artwork, this material artwork. I want it to be that it's generating, this is what I aspire to. This is not what I proclaim the work does. I aspire, what would be beautiful to me is if people have an experience with their own memory, identity, and speculative reality. That's how I'm going to talk about the future. We don't know the future. Is a speculation of their identity.
Can we move on to the next slide, Nick? But while we do that, speculation of identity, can you elaborate more on that, Elliott? That's awesome.
Well, we build our identity based on the story we tell ourselves, and we have the option to change the story that we tell ourselves about the past, and that how we define ourselves in the future. So I hope that the images and the slippage between them because of the structure of the paintings creates a sense of space between objects that we think of as fixed and a mutability that allows people to speculate, not only about the painting and the images, but then in turn about their own relation to the image, which is identity building. I like purple vases. I don't like cats.
Right. And that goes back to that very first definition of like criticality, like the Kantian idea, which is like art's role is to define what we like and what we don't like. The ability to like individuate, the ability to like say, this is what I know now, that I like know I have taste in this way and not this way.
And I don't believe in that. I'm just massaging it loose. I'm trying to, you know, I'm trying to, like, I want to brainwash you without giving you anything to believe in. Like, just hose down your brain. You know, because we always talk about brainwashing as, we always talk about not cleansing the mind, but replacing it with a new structure. But what if we could just clean our mind? Like hose off the barnacle, the fixed or the neural pathways of habit.
I'm not going
Again,
to miss.
I feel really like, this is what I wish my art did. This is like not, I'm not saying it does it. These are the things I think about when I make art.
I'm not going to miss an opportunity to bring up Blake here in his concept of innocence, which is this kind of like innocence as like a restart to the mind to review culture through a critical lens. It's kind of a romantic project in some ways, like offering art as like the power washing. Someone just said in the chat that it's like a second chance at like shedding ideology.
Indoctrination. And we're all subject to that. No one is not indoctrinated. We have so much, everyone has so many blind spots.
I wanted to ask you, because you talk about being a minimalist when it comes to directing, and they are non-hierarchical, this field, in so many ways, and you're trying as little as possible to direct. But then there are moments that you are asking your friends and family to dress up and perform parts within these fields. And that seems more important or more direct maybe than the collection. But do you view the collection and the directing and the photography of friends all on the same level? Are those hints at like direction and importance to you?
Well, I am directing them, and I often direct them because I am attempting, I am photographing because of who they are, and I'm collecting images of the people that I love. I direct them often to, sometimes I do put them in parts which are not them at all, as a way to bridge the gap, like to render it more artificial because it is so personal, and to bridge the gap with all the images that I'm placing them in, which are more public, foreign to me, cultural, social, because I want there to be a conflation. I'm not a dichotomy. All of my friends and family have their own social lives separate from me and my subjectivity. They function and they have different politics from me. I don't believe I can take a naturalistic image of anyone anyway. So in a way, directing them is more honestly highlighting the mechanism of my representation of them. In a way, it's a, I don't know.
When it goes back to that motif of the mirror, that you're trying to reflect, you're trying to make yourself absent as much as possible, as an act of kind of generosity, as an act of acknowledgement that you can't depict another person, so you're just setting the stage. Is that accurate?
No, because I'm telling them what to do. They're actually, when I do a photo shoot, they're mimicking me. I pantomime what they do. Like I dance and move my body, and they mirror me. I am definitely conscious of the fact that when I photograph people, I'm photographing my image of them, not them. Does that make sense?
Can you say it one more time?
Well, I've constructed ideas about people's identities, and that's what I'm photographing. I'm trying to be honest about that instead of thinking I, as an artist, can define someone's identity. The only thing I'm defining is my little piece of my view of them. And then so I make it very artificial as a way to acknowledge the conceit, the futility of the, I don't believe in capturing, like if someone, they take pictures of someone and they're so beautiful, they really capture their spirit. I think that's bullshit. I don't believe in, I don't know, like I'm trying to think, like, who are the photographers that traveled America in the 30s and took pictures of people? They were, that's not those people. That's the photographer's idea of those people encapsulated in choices.
Which I love what you're saying, because it channels all the way back to your initial, for me anyways, I could be wrong, your initial ideas of like Greek play and Greek mythology, which is that like the actors are avatars for getting at like the cultural conscious of them, that like the individual actors are not nearly as important. They're incredibly subjective, and it is about telling this larger, not objective, subjective sense at like a broader culture. And then of course, I've been thinking about it a lot, but the jump from Greek tragedy, comedy to modernist play, and the way you're doing that now seems so obvious. It was like a connection I've never made, but it's such a wonderful connection that you've drawn between that, in the sense of like who the actor is and their importance.
Is there a question?
My question is, like, you're talking about that you're not trying to represent the soul of the person of your family. You're showing that it's a contrivance. Does that have a relationship back to Greek tragedy?
Well, I mean, I'm also trying to hold on to my idea of them in a genuine way. The thing that it makes me think is there's in Alcestis, there's this scene where Admetos has to return to the house after he's buried his wife, and he says he's mourning the fact that the house will be dusty. That's his representation of lost. And I think when I lived alone, I didn't mind being by myself. I love being by myself. But what I hated was knowing that I was the last person to move any object wherever I saw it. I don't know how that relates to acting and actors and Greek tragedy, but the notion of law, me photographing the people that I love is like, I don't want, it's like I am also scared of the dusty house, Admetos's dusty house. I know that makes no logical sense. So, I mean, maybe the answer is I understand my relationships via literature. I am actually making sense of Greek literature by casting the people that I love in the roles, and vice versa. You know, it's like Heracles has traumatized PTSD. Medea as a mother who prioritizes love over motherhood. You know, things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they are symbols. That's not the people in my life. It's just, I have to go there to understand, to imagine. It's an imaginative exercise. It's a speculative exercise that I'm doing to make sense of the bigger world, but also make sense. It's a dialectic where I make sense of the world, both personal and grand, or what was the word, mega, like the bigger, broader landscape, by that back and forth of micro to macro.
Yeah. Well, you're starting with love. You're starting with the community of people you love, and then opening it up to themes like symbols of culture, not them, but like as these larger entities, and then bring it back to ultimately you feel a certain way about them. This one has gorgeous structure. I love seeing this like detail image shows like the density that Elliott gets to. Can we move on to the next slide? The judge, that paleness emotes so much. We have this like black column, this like ominous, like very formal structure sitting in the center of the thing. And we have gesture at the borders, almost like a finger painting or like a drag of a brush. So there is like a chaos at the border, or like an id, or like your thing, your feeling about the thing maybe, but then density at the center. One thing I wanted to bring up too, I have thoughts or interpretations about it, but most of your works in the show, at the very edge of the canvas, you're lining up accumulations of unused pins and needles. Is that something you'd like to talk about or get into or discuss?
Sure. Well, it's a residue of the process, because I pin everything in place. And then as I glue it, I move the pin to the side. So the picture is my arm span. and the edges are not worked because I tend to just stay in one spot. And that for me is a way to record, sort of highlight the gestural aspect of the construction of the image. So the painting is a stage and I am sort of leaving an action on the paint or on the stage. So what happens, like there's a flexibility. So the pen, if it was used in the process, it's welcome to stay in the painting. It's not, I don't discard it because it no longer has utility.
I love that. When it creates, it has the charge of like potential energy. To me, how I read them was like, these are the pins that could still be used, or they're the spectators. They're like the audience to this thing. But it's also this performative thing of your choice not to include every pin back into it. You know, there could have been more pins, there could have been more things attached, but these are kind of the witnesses to everything you've done.
I also think of it like a still life on a table, like a tabletop. And you have a meal, the tools, the forks are there too, as well as the food.
I love that. Can we go to the next one, Nick? After we give this a moment of looking at this detail, this accumulation, this swarm in the center. And let's talk too, I know it's important, very important to understanding your work, your collection of the archive, which is you're collecting and categorizing so much information, too much information by color, alphabetically. And it's important that you don't have a place for them yet. You're storing them with the idea that they might one day be used. So there's this like pre-charge to the way you're thinking of the images, or a future kind of speculative aspect to them.
Talking about in my studio?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the work that I do that is, it's like I tend to the studio as if it's an ecosystem. So, and that's another way to undermine my authority. So I have chores and a routine, like if I get a catalog in the mail, instead of recycling it, I go through it and rip out the pages with images that I like and file them. There's maintenance like that. And consequently, sometimes the work is daily, but then there'll be like an avalanche of production because things can make themselves. If I have a folder that has like 28 images of Ronald Reagan, suddenly there's something there already.
The archive is kind of directing you in some ways, or you're allowing the archive.
Because every time I rip an image out or cut an image out or label it, I am speculating and making an artwork.
An artwork to come.
In my mind, in my imagination, or making multiple artworks in my mind.
I wanted to finish with these. This one and the one after it are both in the left room right when you walk into the gallery, and have a completely different relationship to density and accumulation, and involve your wonderful gesture more than in the other works. I wanted to talk about or ask you about how they relate to the rest of the show, your allowance to like incorporate this.
So these works are actually, it's so funny, talking about drawing and planning, they are, you'll see a strip of, a rectangular long strip of parchment on the drawing. That is the scale of the 40-foot mural I'm making for Prospect. And these drawings are preparatory drawings for Prospect. So I was thinking about the scale of a picture that is 8 feet tall and 40 feet long. So proportion of 1 to 5. And just trying to wrap my head around what that even would be like. And so instead of planning that, I did this drawing where I just sort of improvised, you know, images in that scale, but then also on the bigger page drew in ways that were as if you zoomed in to the mural. So in this way, I've shown an overall of a speculation of the composition, but not planning, just a meditation on or a dress rehearsal. And then the detail of the drawing itself is sort of very fast dress rehearsals for the detail and the imagery, using the images that I would use. Thinking about gesture and color, materials. This has gouache painting as well as oil stick. Collage.
Brilliant. When I saw them, I didn't understand that they were preparatory or that they were annotations for the larger work. I read them kind of in this vein of art that I love, where the gesture is trying to reclaim images. Like I was thinking of like that series that Albert Erlin did in like 2008, where he like takes the advertisement page and then pulls out of it something with like oil paint, like how the gesture kind of creates this like metaphysical activation of images. And it's a type of work I love seeing, this like taking things like the Pink Panther and like through use of drawing, like kind of getting at this like the soul. It's like pretty romantic, but getting it like trying to reactivate these things with your hand. Was really just blown away by them. I really liked looking at these as well.
Thank you.
Let's go to the last slide. And this is, of course, the chandelier hanging in the center of the gallery, which in Genet's recommendations for how to perform it, this is the one thing that never changes in the play as the scenes change over and over again. And so this has the physical weight, the reality, the realness of the entire play in it. Do you want to talk about how you're thinking of trying to depict such an important part of the play through sculpture?
Well, I thought of the chandelier as a reminder of the artifice of the brothel. So no matter what scene is in the brothel, whether it's the sacristy or a garden or a mountainside, the chandelier hangs over everything. So I like the idea that the chandelier, I mean, for me, the chandelier in a way does the opposite in the physical space of the gallery. It it reminds you of the tactility of the paintings and your bodily relation to them, instead of them as fictive windows of illusionary space.
Because it does have a relationship to the body as this internal external element that you've been able to capture, and also gesture really coming through. It has the rhythm of the works on the wall, but then you're thinking of like your body walking around this thing and these kind of like organs hanging from the chandelier, this entanglement and swarm. And the neon has such a really nice relationship to organs, you know, or like things that carry information throughout this kind of networked web that I was like really stunned by when I saw it.
I also thought of this as like some sort of like brain cap, like some sort of like cap you could put on to like trace neural network, or the idea of, I mean, I guess maybe in my own associations, like this is explication, and but like that thing, that little ball at the, this is a brain. Basically, it's a brain. And
yeah, and it brain, and it also gave me the associations of kind of like just the spinal, like the neural network going out that allow you to feel and touch.
Yes, yes, the body, the nervous system, sensory, yeah, not just the cerebral brain.
Wonderful. Well, Elliott, I have one last question, and I think we should switch over to audience questions because we have a lot. But in Genet's notes on how to perform the play, it's about who's in control, who has the power, who is the authority. And Genet even suggests that it's like one of the maids is directing the flow of the entire thing, which is a lovely thought, that one of the smaller characters is actually the maestro. And I guess I would ask, where is the power of this show? What power are you critiquing? And is it the power of the artist, the power of our political system, all of the above? Who's the maestro?
Well, I mean, okay. The answer to that question is myself. I am questioning my own, the way I'm implicated in broader power structures. And yeah, I mean, I could critique the structures that ensnare me, but really the work itself is an examination of self. I mean, I went to see that Guston show up at Hauser and Worth when I was in town, and I think that's what he was doing. I think that work, I mean, ultimately it does undermine the powers that he's subjected to, but he's looking first at himself. And I like that. I think that's feels ethical.
Is the work ethical?
Try.
I think that's a good note to end my questions on. And I think trying is all we can really try to do. But Nick, do you want to open up to audience questions?
Yes, and I want to thank you both so much. Thank you, Elliott. Thank you, Andrew, for this conversation. I really appreciate the kind of consideration and thought, that you brought to this, Elliott, and that you bring to your work. And I want to, I appreciate it also. Natasha shared a quote in the chat saying that she was reminded of a quote by Louis Bourgeois that, quote, to unravel a torment, you must begin somewhere, unquote. With that, I'm going to pass the mic first to G.E. Schwartz.
Thank you so much. This has lit up so much for me, and I'm sure for everybody else. Especially the, drawing out these major themes of the balcony, of paying to live out our fantasies and the grand balcony and everything. I was wondering, would you say your work is a result of a need, of a necessity? Because I think we know our time here is so limited. And it seems to be a desire to express something or truths or a truth, to say everything you can with the time you're here. And it seems like every moment, every piece you're doing seems to ignite that. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that, if you have any way of thinking or talking about it.
I mean, yes. Yeah. There's an urgency and a fear of death, not because I feared dying. I mean, I've never thought of it this way. I think well, first of all, I love doing it. So I just wanted, but it's not just the action, it's I love life. I love trying to figure it out. And yeah, there is a urgency to it. And a compulsion to it that is real. And I know, and I do personally, I know this is maybe not what a lot of people think an artist should be, but for me, there is therapy. For me, this has a psychological purpose. I actually need it to, if my art was not socialized in any way, I would still be making it, even if that meant destroying a completed artwork to make another. It would, this is, and I don't mean to create a romantic notion of my process, but no, it's a very, it serves a psychological purpose for me.
Yeah, it seems so metabolic with you. I love it that way, But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Next, I'm going to pass the mic over to our friend Lynn. Lynn, you should be able to turn on your mic now.
Hi. Thank you both for a fabulous conversation. And this work really affirms to me this wonderful sense of the power and potential of imagination. It's so deeply imaginative, and it just, like when you say you didn't listen to NPR, I'm like, I get it. It's like sometimes if you dwell too much in the dailiness, it's recycling, and I just felt this burst out into unexplored territories. At the same time, I kept thinking about what I imagined to be this very busy, complex fungal system in the underland, under our earth, and all the activity that goes on, and the communication and the reciprocity. So those two things just seemed to me to meet in this pitch perfect area or point, or whatever word you want to use in your works. And I just have to thank you because they're really brilliant.
You're kind. Thank you. I want to recommend a film to you if you haven't seen it already. It's called Anyata, and
No.
it's about what when you were describing what sounded to me like our relationship to the earth. It's a film, a science fiction film written based on a Nobel laureate poem, and it is about the basic. It's very dark, and the basic concept is it possible to be human without the earth?
Mm,
And I think it's a great movie.
thank you. I mean, just what just strikes me real quickly about the earth, though, is that these things rely on each other. There's a logic to them, even if you don't see it. And that's what I sensed in your paintings and in the wild imagination, but there was a logic and a functional, interdisciplined interaction, a reliance on the different components. So that balance. But anyway, thanks. I'll check the film out. Thank you.
Can I ask Elliott, what was the name of that film again?
Anyata, Aniara.
Got it. Okay. Making a note for myself as well. Thank you. And thank you, Lynn. I am going to pass, I see Carlton, you have a question. I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
Testing 1, 2, audio.
There you are. We can hear you.
Two questions, actually. We went to the opening. It was a wonderful show. My wife works in printing and so knows the people there. And I document stereooptically 3D and artwork. And the chandelier is really amazing. And what didn't show up in this photograph was the color being used. And the neon. I mean, it really is a bit spectacular glow about it. I was just wondering if you wanted to talk. Yeah.
Well, I was looking for a way to bring that sense of detail to form without photography. And the neon was, so I've worked with the neon artist previously on other projects, but usually I would order something or give direction and then he would fabricate. But this time he was so generous to come here and set up his whole shop in my studio and hand blow everything with me right there. So I could say, cut this piece this way and fuse the glass. And so what the result is, and you only see it in the detail, in the physical form, but I'm very happy with it, is the handmade decision making of the neon itself. And then within that, you see the gas undulating and moving because the what we did with the form. So the gas, it doesn't just light up like a bulb, it like moves and pulses and you sense it as a gas. And there's one other thing I was thinking about that. Oh, it has also, the neon artist was very generous with me and gave me this uranium glass, which hasn't been made since the 60s, which with a certain gas in it, and I can't remember which one right now, illuminates that sort of otherworldly green. So anyway, that's something.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Carlton, and thank you, Elliott. Next, I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Malvika. Malvika, you can turn on your mic now.
Thank you so much, Nick. And thank you so much, Elliott and Andrew. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've been taking notes all throughout, trying to draft which question I would like to ask you. The pace, it's just been like a really beautiful pace for a Friday, like so kind of like philosophical, and it's just been really poetic and lovely to receive. So actually, I'm going to read a question asked on behalf of Natasha Aurora in the chat. And the question is more specific than, but perhaps we'll open up more broadly. It's why is this work, why are these works, some of them are uniquely titled with numerals. And we're sort of wondering, you know, there's one that's titled 21/8/21. We're wondering if these have like, you know, date significances, you know, are they like mapping certain events or certain like narrative events, certain like memory recollection events? If you could tell us a little bit, whatever your comfort level is, about
So
sort of the story behind the name.
the all titles with that structure, it's 4 numbers with a dot in between, and it's the date is the first 3 numbers, and then the last number is the number of that artwork within the day. So if most of them are .1 because that was an artwork I made that day. Sometimes if I'm able to make more than one, they'll be .2, .3, .4. So, and I do that. A lot of my work is so, you know, deeply tied to narrative, and that it's also nice to have a parallel practice, which is more diaristic and simply expressive, and, you know, about recording my thoughts in time.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so that really answers the question in a really straightforward way, that it is kind of like a laboratory. There are just sequence, but then I think that's a beautiful transition, because our poet today is also someone with a really rich diaristic practice. Thank you so much. I loved looking at these works and sort of hearing the way you speak about them. Handing it back to you, Nick.
Thank you both. And thank you, Natasha, also for sharing that question in the chat. Our next and final question of the day, passing the mic over to the Rail's own Phong H. Bui. Phong, you should be able to turn your mic on now.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Elliott.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, also Andrew, for a wonderful dialogue. I enjoyed so much. I'm sorry I couldn't tune in the whole entire time due to a meeting, but I did take some notes from your conversation, and I'd like to read it to you both. It's a poem for you, Elliott. The pleasure of walking through the garden, Queen, thief, as Jean Genet was, the fifth journal, no way out, sublimity, manic indoctrination. With light touch, I tricked myself into thinking the work making itself, generated through the labor of work, avalanche of production, speed, permanent anxiety of a particular microcosm for the outside world as endless sources of materials to offer Medea to take the lives of her sons as an act of repudiation to Jason's surrender to the conventional tie. It's a theater of cruelty, multitude eroticism, rocking back and forth. Elliott Hundley, how do we define ourselves in the future? Okay, so that was
Thank you.
But let me ask you a quick question, Elliott. I paid a visit yesterday with our dear friend Connie Llewellyn, the legendary curator from San Francisco. We paid a visit to Jada Fail and Bruce Conner. And while we were looking at Bruce Conner collage, you know, the inherent dot vision of resistance against power, against authority, as well as violent and consuming culture and whatnot. The perfect polymathic nonconformist, I would say. So it's not just Bruce Conner's collage, but also I feel the same way about Jazz's collage, Robert Duncan's partner. And you know, they both evoke the surreal tradition, a very Pacific, particularly with jazz, very Pacific Victorian past of San Francisco culture, you know. So I'm thinking in that kind of way with even our good friend Fred Thomas Selly, you know, his own collage as a kind of compact, compressed odyssey that hovers somewhere between utopian and dystopian, you know, in the multiplicity way of seeing the world. So I wonder, have you ever thought of that tradition? I know you're in LA, and LA is very different than San Francisco. So yeah, can you sort of elaborate on that a little bit, Elliott?
Yeah, I mean, Bruce Conner and Jess are, I cannot overstate how formative their work is for me. I mean, Bruce Conner in its freedom and multi-vein strategies, and Jess in, you know, I think a lot of people have marginalized that work.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, he gave me like the freedom to embrace some very unfashionable aesthetics and relation to literature.
You answered it all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bravo. Back to you, Nikki.
Well, thank you both. And a reminder to everyone that's able to in the New York area to go and see the show at Casman, New York. It's on view through October 23rd. So I hope you all get a chance to go see it, and hopefully prospect New Orleans this fall to see the mural. But thank you, Fong, for starting us off with poetry, because we end all of our events with poetry as well. So I'm very thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, who will be reading some prose for us, Catherine Fatima. Writer Catherine Fatima was born and raised in Toronto and is tuning in today from Montreal. Her first book, Sludge Utopia, was published by Book Hug Press in 2018 and was reviewed by the Literary Review of Canada and the White Wall Review. You might enjoy it if you are interested in sex, depression, fitness of the self, for life under the hell of capitalism, young adulthood, a bit too much continental philosophy for a novel, latent Catholicism, some drug use, friendship, family, and love. It is a work of autofiction. And without further ado, handing it over to you, Catherine.
Hi, am I the centerpiece now?
You are.
Okay.
You are.
I'm still looking at Nick. First, that was wonderful. Such an amazing discussion to listen to. What I'm reading from now is not the work that was in the bio, but something new, which is it's an excerpt from a book that takes place at a health clinic on a rural retreat, kind of. So it's not poetry, but it reads in a non-narrative way. And it also has a lot to do with what the discussion, the theme of sort of subjection under societal constraints that have to be reversed in order to sort of flip out of it and start a new world. That is the major thing. But it's not an essay, so it's not completely serious. Okay. Our strength, Jane said, constantly evaded us under the circumstances of this world, but the truth was it was easy to cultivate with 4 basic aptitudes. We needed to be able to love others, to experience pleasure and joy, to bear pain and frustration, and finally to see a future worth living for. I first found the system too simplistic, but as I sat there tallying up recently endured miseries, most indeed would only have been fleeting irritations if I'd have been a bit more skillful in these efforts. Further, it seemed that social love, futural hope, and active sensual engagement could together comprise a full and meaningful life. There were few specifics to Jane's schematic. We didn't need to reproduce, to have a family or legacy. We didn't need to have conflict or ambition. It was a welcoming vision of health that one could live out without much difficulty if less hindered by all the worthless contingencies of life. This process necessitated, however, an active engagement with pain. Forms of therapy that sought to do away with pain too quickly were not to be trusted. As long as it were not given the power to subordinate us as suffering, the material of pain was worth indulging in. Pain was just one of the constitutive elements of our conscious experience, and it was to be learned from. The most important thing was not to cede to anyone else the truth of our self-command. Jane drew the dictum out methodically, meeting each of our eyes as she said it. I felt welcome in her configuration, moved by it. I began to understand that the play of pleasure against pain was not only the very foundation of our interpersonal relationships, but the form of subjectivity itself. We knew ourselves in the passage between these contrasting experiences. Like history, memory defined itself by fluctuations made possible by negativity. In the body, these same flows were articulated. Everything moving inside us took the pull of the void. Through this movement, we're made whole. If we know our pain, we can accept the experience of it. And by pulling it inward, we can make the pain our own. Saying this, Jane stretched both hands out in front of her and dug her left thumbnail into her right wrist. Her nail had been filed into an almond shape. It made a small crevice in her skin without breaking it. She told us, "You see, this is pain, but it's my pain. It's a little exhilaration that I can bring out just for myself. There's no meaning to it. It's just another way to feel a sharp sensation on my skin." Within this framework of health, we wouldn't be tempted to force away any experience as a substitute for actually feeling it. It was true, Jane said, that there exists a whole world out there full of pain and displeasure. This is obvious and we can't control it. But it is exactly in an aim to evade the pain of our difficult experiences that we regard these pains as passive. It is the very aim toward escape that makes pain our pursuer. Once we configure the psychic experience of pain and invest it with the power to overtake us, we take it inside. We swallow the pain up into ourselves and give it the power to control us from within. It floats around in the lost psychic space inside us, a ghost form in our caverns, acting out, living through us, hungry for more, baking to grow, unappeasable, aching for more passive subjection. Therein, she said, lies the real problem. But if we can inhabit our pain, if we can tolerate it, it would be an experience just like any other. There's nothing that needs to be done with it. We feel the pain, we finish with it, and it leaves us on its own. Jane further distinguished feeling from emotion. A feeling is a commanding thing. It has the power to transmute will into action, thought into fact. You can feel that something is true, she said, but you can't emote a truth. You can only emote your pathos. Feeling is active, emotion is passive. There's a slowness to feeling. It builds, it can accumulate not just in oneself, but in a group. For this reason, it has a communalizing element and it can motivate unified activity. Emotion is shallow. It has no objective counterpart and it wills nothing by its own force into being. Emotion is the sucking thing. It's the shrinking absence that pulls Big Daddy suffering into our psyches. Though nefarious forces in the world cannot truly be responsible for our anguish unless we allow them, they do aim to elicit our emotions. When we're overcome, we're manipulable. Excessive emotionality is the motive of all number of thoughtless means of self-satisfaction. Compulsive consumption, dissociative or remote behaviors, most activity that propels us toward the world of virtual sociality, etc. From here, the very agents that cause us to be overwhelmed are the ones who profit from the actions we take to soothe ourselves. Most of what we do without looking is for the benefit of an unseen actor. Everything with which the internet interferes, or that which can be routed through capital, siphons off something for itself. To refuse ourselves the indulgence of passivity wouldn't mean that we can't recognize that there was a big psychopolitical project at work, severing us from feeling, leaving us in a state of perpetual emotionality, for and against which it provided the antidote and distraction. No, a staunch dedication to feeling, with all of the attention and presence required, was necessary because of our seduction toward limp emotionality. We could then pursue our feelings as convictions and carve them in a world that it was up to us to make form in. Because there are wills and desires actively redrawing the contours of the world in unsanctioned ways every day. Nothing is verified before being put into practice. We needn't surrender. What is inside comes from outside, but hasn't been articulated yet. What has been articulated is experienced at the level of injunction against what is intimately known, but what is articulated is from the past. What is felt is what is current. Politics practically emerges as either violence or remaking the intimate, familial, and communal relations. There is libidinal energy to each. The bonds come from something language doesn't know yet. You can't respond to the will to taste by having someone who has been assigned power tell you it doesn't exist. You've already tasted it. You wouldn't know the craving otherwise. To touch new things you've already been touching. There's always delay. Your eyes always open after. Jane's body puffed up as she spoke. She swayed toward her enunciations as she sermonized. I didn't know if what she was saying made any sense, but it nevertheless bore meaning for me. It didn't matter if feeling and emotion were indistinguishable outside of camp if I could live out this distinction, and if the distinction could improve my life while simultaneously bringing me closer to a world of Jane's making. I gazed at her as she continued, animate with the feeling she sought to incite in us. Her enthusiasm grew in me as I sat there, smiling. Okay, let's.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was a perfect way to conclude today's conversation. So thank you. And we look forward to that text. And thank you, MOCA. There's a link to Sludge Utopia if anyone would like to check that out. Please support your local poets. So I want to thank you, Catherine. Thank you again, Elliott and Andrew. We are here every day at 1 p.m. So if you're available, join us on Monday for a conversation between Ron Nagel and Dan Cameron. We'll conclude with a poetry reading from our poetry editor, Anselm Berrigan's new book, Pregrets, with a reading by our own Fong H. Bowie here again. So join us then. And I'd like to thank you all for joining. Thank you for your questions. And I hope you all have a great weekend. You can now turn on your microphones, say hello and goodbye. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elliott.
Ron.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elliott.
Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine. Great reading.
Catherine, you're my brilliant friend.
Thank
Just
you so
just
much.
ecstatic.
Thank you. Thank you, Elliott. Thank you. Andrew.
Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine.
Rising
Thank
Star.
you, everyone.
Thank you. And do go and see Elliott's show. It's
Absolutely.
incredible, okay? Gotta see them.
Thank you.
And thank you for the beautiful reading, Catherine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. We're gonna have lunch now, you guys.
Thank you, Brooklyn. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
Much love to you all.
Thank you.
Bye.